Last December, my own son told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas. The words were small, but they cracked something heavy and old inside me, like tapping a chisel against a stone and hearing it split for the first time. I was sitting on Noah's leather couch in Riverbend Heights, the neighborhood with spotless sidewalks and maple trees that looked like they were ordered from a catalog. A 12-foot tree pressed its shadow against the window. Sabrina had a pine and vanilla candle lit, the expensive kind that smells like a boutique. My jacket was still on. I didn't feel at home enough to hang it anywhere.
Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comment section below.
I had started to say something about making a turkey. Elena used to rub the skin with orange zest and herbs until the whole house smelled clean and hopeful. And Noah shifted, like my words were a pebble in his shoe. He stared at the coffee table I helped pick out and said, "Dad, we're doing something different this year." He didn't look at me. "It's more intimate. Sabrina's parents are flying in. The seating will be tight. Tight. And a house I helped them buy." I nodded, because men like me learn to nod. My hands were dry from the winter air and from work. Cortez Build Works doesn't stop just because your heart does. I ran a thumb over a nick in the table's edge, remembering the day I carried it up their steps and Sabrina laughed because it didn't match the curtains yet. She ordered new ones the next morning, and I told myself that was young people taste and not a red flag. Noah kept talking, soft and apologetic, the way a good kid speaks when he's made up his mind and hates himself for it. "We'll do something after," he said. "Maybe the weekend." He meant well, I think. He always means well, but I could feel the shape of the thing underneath. I wasn't being rescheduled. I was being removed. I looked around their living room, at the framed photos where, year by year, my face moved toward the edge, then slipped out of the frame entirely. Sabrina's smile in every picture could have sold a magazine subscription. The ornaments were white and gold. Not a single paper snowflake from Noah's childhood made the tree. Maybe that's normal when people grow up. Maybe that's what you tell yourself when the normal thing hurts. Sabrina stepped out from the kitchen, smoothing an apron that had words stitched on it about hostess life. She kissed Noah's cheek, then poured herself tea like I wasn't there. "My parents are really excited. They have traditions. We'll be doing it like they do." Her tone was pleasant. My body heard the rest. My throat burned with 1,000 swallowed sentences. I thought about the balance transfers I'd made that month from Harbor National Bank, automatic as sunrise. I thought about the down payment that took the breath out of my retirement. I thought about the roof I repaired on my own house in Maple Crest, patch by patch, so I could keep sending money to this one. Most of all, I thought about Elena, gone 8 years now, and how she would have patted my knee and said, "Rafa, we give because we can." Would she have said that here, with the lights humming and my son refusing his own father a chair at Christmas? "Sure," I said finally, swallowing the metal taste of pride. Noah looked relieved and miserable at the same time. He promised we'd talk soon. I stood, careful not to scuff their perfect rug with my work boots. Sabrina's eyes flicked to the front door, and I knew the cue. I picked up my jacket, the old one with dried joint compound near the cuff. On the way out, I touched the door frame, habit from a carpenter's life, and felt the grain Ilana used to call the tree's handwriting. Outside, the air snapped cold across my face. I made it to my truck before the shaking started. It wasn't violent, just steady, the way an old machine rattles when a bolt has finally worked loose. Across the street, someone had a plastic reindeer in the yard. The red bulb nose blinked, without rhythm. I watched it too long because it was easier than thinking about my son's face when he chose intimate over me. On the drive back to Maple Crest, Riverton looked like a holiday card. Wreaths on doors. A kid dragging a sled over dry pavement, hopeful even without snow. When I hit the light at 8th and Alder, where there's always a slick of December shade on the asphalt, I remembered a different winter, years ago, when Noah rode shotgun and Elena sang along to a scratchy radio, her voice thin and sweet. He must have been 10 because he had braces and kept tonguing the wire. He begged for cocoa, we stopped at a corner spot that isn't there anymore, and Elena laughed when he burned his tongue and pretended it didn't hurt. That memory reached right into my chest and twisted. Back home, the porch bulb flickered twice, like it couldn't decide whether to do me a favor. Inside, I set my keys on the entry table Elena picked at a yard sale, oak, solid, still holding us together. The house smelled faintly of cedar, because I leave a block of it in my work bag. I kicked off my boots and sat in the quiet. A stack of envelopes waited where I'd left them. Statements, receipts, those polite emails printed out because I don't trust screens with the important things. I didn't open them yet. I made coffee, even though the day didn't need more caffeine. I stirred sugar and told myself it was just a holiday schedule change, that my son had grown into a man with his own family, and I should be proud he chose it with his chest. But the truth rose anyway. It wasn't about chairs. It was about respect, and about the way Sabrina's voice had slid right over me, and about the thing I pretended I couldn't see. I had become useful, not loved. I carried my mug to the living room and looked at the mantel. Elena's photo sits in a cheap silver frame. She's wearing the green dress from our 25th anniversary. She'd been sick that year, but insisted on lipstick, a plum shade she said made her look awake. "You're stubborn," I told her then. "Lucky for you," she said. The clock ticked loud enough that I noticed every second landing. I whispered to her picture, because that's what grief makes of a man. He said no, mi amor, to Christmas. I don't dramatize my life. I work, I pay, I fix. Even my mistakes are practical. But that night the practical answers felt thin. Was I supposed to nod my way out of my own family? Was I meant to leave a casserole on their step like a stray, grateful for crumbs? The phone buzzed. Noah. One text, 3 dots that disappeared, then came back, then disappeared for good. I stared until the screen went black. My chest tightened, not the scary kind, just the tight that comes when every muscle has been clenching for years and decides to let go all at once. I stood and opened the top drawer of the credenza. Inside lies my life in paper, a copy of our fixed contract with Harbor National Bank for the automatic transfer, a set of keys to Noah's first apartment, still on a ring with a plastic dinosaur he loved when he was 5, a wrinkled receipt for a mixer Sabrina swore would pay for itself with all the baking she planned to do. I held the keys until the plastic bit into my palm. Then I put them down and walked to the window. The neighbor across the street had her grandkids over, 2 little tornadoes in puffy coats, chasing each other with foam swords. The smallest one tripped and started that silent opened mouth cry children do before the sound arrives. His grandmother scooped him up and kissed the top of his hat. The sound came late, then stopped in her shoulder. The coffee went cold. I drank it anyway. The old baseboard heater ticked like it always had. Elena's frame caught a sliver of streetlight and threw it back, stubborn as she ever was. My heartbeat slowed, a dull drum I could finally hear past my anger. I washed the mug and set it upside down to dry. I wrote myself a note on an index card. You are not a spare chair. I didn't know, not yet, what I would do with that sentence, but I could feel the ground shifting under me, the way soil does before a frost heave, quiet, then decisive. If you've ever gone through something like this, drop a comment. I'm listening. Okay, deep breath. Let me tell you everything.
I taped the index card to the inside of the credenza door and pulled out the binder where I keep the important stuff. Plastic sleeves, tabs labeled with a black marker, bank logos peeking through like tiny flags. The house settled around me with those winter pops and sighs, and I laid the statements in a row on the dining table Elena once sanded by hand. I didn't bother turning on the overhead, just the lamp by the window and a cheap desk light that makes everything look like a workbench. Maybe that's what this was, a repair job on the part of my life that kept sparking. I started at the first transfer, 5 years back. $2,750 pulled from my Harbor National account on the 15th of every month, like a tide I'd convinced myself was natural. The memo line still said mortgage support, my handwriting. I traced the loop of the G and felt foolish warmth in my ears. I flipped, highlighted, totaled. A yellow river ran down the pages. By year 2, my notes got thinner. By year 3, a margin reminder in my own blocky print. Postpone dentist, reschedule car maintenance. By year 4, the grocery receipts were clipped inside. Store brand soup, eggs, bread, the cheap coffee that leaves a bitterness at the back of the tongue. There was even a receipt for a too large bag of rock salt because I figured if I salted my own steps, I could skip buying proper boots. What kind of father budgets like that while paying for another family's front door wreaths? I found the down payment check, too. The copy had my name printed next to a number I used to think belonged to other people. I remembered the notary's pen running dry halfway through and all of us laughing. Sabrina had said, "Oh my gosh, this is so meant to be. Even the pen is dramatic." And I had smiled, ridiculous and proud. I don't like calling myself naive, but the word was waiting for me on that page. I totaled by year, then across the years. I did it twice because my hands had a tremor I didn't want to admit. I checked the math with a $10 calculator that still has a smear of joint compound on the plus key. The number that landed stared at me with the calm of a weather report. I had been standing in the rain and swearing the sky was clear. I got up for water and caught my reflection in the black window. Tired eyes, shoulders I hadn't unclenched in months. The house was too quiet, like a stage after the actors had gone home, props still in place. I thought about all the small laters I had been living with. Later I'll replace the porch switch. Later I'll buy a decent winter coat. Later I'll frame the photo of Elena in the green dress instead of leaving it in that thrifted frame with the bent support. Later I'll tell Noah that love isn't measured in monthly drafts. Later never comes unless you force it onto the schedule. I set the water down and dialed Harbor National. The robot voice asked me to say in a few words what you're calling about, and I nearly laughed at how far a life can drift and still fit under a few words. "Cancel automatic transfer," I said. It shuffled me through a maze, then clicked to a person. "Harbor National, this is Alyssa. How can I help you today?" She sounded young and inexperienced at hiding boredom. "I need to stop a recurring transfer." I gave account numbers, spelled my name twice, answered a security question about the street I grew up on. When she said, "Cypress Lane," the image came fast. My mother's laundry flapping in summer. My father oiling his boots on the steps. Elena at 17 waving from the sidewalk. The past is an ambush like that. "I see a scheduled transfer for the 15th, $2,750 to an external mortgage account at Harbor National. You'd like to cancel it?" "Yes, effective immediately." My voice surprised me with how steady it was. She paused. I pictured her tracking down a button I could not say. "Okay, I can stop future transfers. The next one is 3 days out, but there may be a pending hold if the receiving account has already—" "Stop it," I said, gentle but final. "All of them, no more." "Done," she said, after a few seconds that felt like a test. "You'll receive a confirmation by email and mail. Is there anything else I can—" "No," I said, and then changed my mind. "Actually, yes. Thank you." When I hung up, the house felt bigger, not emptier, bigger, like a wall had been slid a few feet outward. My breath came easier, almost like the first inhale after a long swim. I turned off the desk light and stood in the gloom, letting the table full of paper lose its edges. Was this what relief felt like at my age? Like a radiator finally bleeding out the trapped air? I made tea because coffee felt too jittery for the moment. I used the good mug, thick blue around the rim, one Elena bought at a craft fair after haggling the man down $1 just to make me laugh. The kettle rattled and clicked off, steam rose and fogged the window, and I wiped a stripe through it with the back of my hand. Outside, a neighbor's inflatable snowman bowed in the wind as if agreeing with my decision. Back at the table, I gathered the statements into months, then years, then a stack. I didn't burn them. Fire feels like theater to me, and I had made enough theater for Sabrina's benefit. I ran each page through the shredder until the bin choked full of confetti. When the shredder jammed, I used a butter knife to clear the teeth. That felt right, using the ordinary tools of a house to clean a mess I'd made in the heart of it. I pulled down the porch switch cover with a screwdriver, blew out dust, tightened a wire, put it back. The light came on and stayed on. A small thing, but it hit me embarrassingly hard. How many small things had I postponed while I financed someone else's big ones? I set a fresh notebook on the table and wrote 3 lines across the top. January, porch repair, grocery upgrade. I added, call Dr. Kim, because my knees have been talking to me like old friends who only call to complain. Then I wrote a question and boxed it. What do you owe beyond money? It wasn't for Noah, it was for me. My phone buzzed again. Noah. A short text this time. Dad, can we talk tomorrow? I stared at the screen while the tea cooled. My thumb hovered, then lowered. I turned the phone face down. I wasn't ready to be persuaded by the voice that sounds like my own when I was 28 and sure the world would keep lending me time. I grabbed my coat and walked out to the garage where I keep spare hardware. It smells like sawdust and old winters in there, like every unspoken thing a man stores near his tools. I found a box of warm bulbs and replaced the dead one in the hallway. When the light snapped to life, it threw a soft oval on Elena's photo. I touched the frame, steadied it. I stopped. I told her, out loud because some truths need the air. The house hummed. A baseboard clicked. The silence answered, yes. Back at the table, I totaled one last column. Time. It wasn't exact, but my pencil sketched months into years. I wrote 5 Christmases, then crossed that out and wrote 5 Decembers because I couldn't give the word Christmas away to people who thought chairs measured love. 5 Decembers of choosing later over now. 5 Decembers of letting my own home go dim while I lit somebody else's space. I pressed the pencil point until it snapped. What was I supposed to do? Keep paying for a door that wouldn't open? Pretend the ban was a clerical error and hope the spreadsheet of my life corrected it? I washed the tea mug, took the trash out into the thin cold. The night was clear enough that I could see my breath for a few feet before it vanished. Somewhere across town, a dozen houses were practicing for their perfect holiday photos. Somewhere, someone's father was being handed a plate and a chair and a smile that didn't cost anything. I tipped my head back and let the cold find my scalp through thinning hair. No more, I said to the dark. Inside, I turned off the living room lamp and left the hallway light burning, on purpose, like a promise to myself that I could keep small things bright. I wrote one more index card and stuck it below the first. A boundary is not revenge. Then I put the shredding bag by the door to take out in the morning, locked up, and sat for a minute in the soft hum of a house I was finally choosing to belong to.
The morning after I cut the cord, I woke earlier than usual and let the house breathe. I brewed strong coffee and stood at the sink, feeling the quiet like a balm I hadn't earned yet. The index cards inside the credenza door, "You are not a spare chair," and "a boundary is not revenge" sat like sentries I could nod to if my resolve wobbled. I sliced an apple, ate it over the sink the way Elena used to scold me for, and rinsed the knife clean. By mid-morning, my phone lit up. Sabrina. Her name shone like a warning flare. I stared until the buzzing stopped, then picked up on the second call because I wanted to choose my no instead of letting the call log do it for me. "We need you to pick up my parents," she said, the words already arranged. "Cascade Air, Flight 312, landing at 2. They'll be at Riverton Regional. You're closest, and Noah slammed getting the food prepped." That last part stung, a reminder that the table would be beautiful without me. I didn't answer right away. In the pause, I could hear the faint buzz of her blender and the clink of glass on quartz. "Raphael," she added, voice sharpening, "you've always been dependable." There it was, dependable like a light switch. I said, calm as I could manage, "I won't be able to do that." No rage, no explanation, just clean language. She laughed once, that short paper-cut sound. "Let's not make today difficult. 2 o'clock, Terminal B, don't be late." "I'm not coming," I repeated, and I set the phone down on the counter. It rang again. I let it. It rang a third time. I turned the volume down until the phone's urgent insistence was just a mosquito trapped behind a lampshade. At 1:45, I brewed tea and opened the local paper to the crossword, not because I cared about 16 across, but because I needed to practice keeping my hands still. A well-placed no can feel like shoplifting when you spent years paying for things you cannot afford. I watched steam unzip into the cold air and imagined Victor and Diane rolling their luggage across tile, scanning strangers' faces for mine. Was I a bad man for choosing not to be their driver? Or was I finally choosing not to be a prop? 2 came and went. The phone vibrated across the table, jittery with texts. I didn't check them. I washed the cutting board. I wiped down the stove. I polished the edge of the picture frame with the hem of my shirt until Elena's smile sharpened in the glass. Around 4, the pounding started. Not a knock, a demand. Fists on wood, the kind of sound that reverberates in the joists. I took my time walking to the door, not out of drama, but because I refused to sprint like a servant late to a bell. When I opened it, Victor filled the doorway, red-faced, jaw set so hard his cheek twitched. Diane stood beside him, immaculate even through travel fatigue, a scarf wound high on her neck like armor. Sabrina hovered a step behind, mascara smudged into a soft gray under each eye. "You left us," Victor said. "Not hello, not our names. 2 hours on a curb like strays." "You had a phone," I said, keeping my voice level. "Elderly people shouldn't be abandoned," Diane added, the word elderly stretching to make room for her indignation. "It's freezing." I thought about the weather and almost laughed. It was 50 degrees and dry, the sort of Riverton December day that tricks you into forgetting what storms can do. I said, "You're not abandoned, you're here." Sabrina's gaze darted over my shoulder into my hallway, inventorying my life. "You embarrassed us," she said. "Do you understand the optics?" "Yes," I said. "I understand exactly what things look like when you finally tell the truth." Victor took a half step inside, as if the force of his dissatisfaction could make my space his. "You don't get to get petty now, not after everything." Everything. The word bloomed a heat in my chest that steadied my hands instead of shaking them. I said, "This is my door. I'm not discussing it here." "This is your last chance to be family," Diane shot back, each syllable brittle. I opened the door wider, not to welcome them, but to point them back to their car. "You don't get to define that word for me anymore." For a second, no one moved. The winter light leaned across the porch and touched all 3 of their faces like a truth serum none of us had asked for. Sabrina looked away first. "Let's go," she told her parents, and her voice had the tired weight of someone who just realized her chess piece isn't the queen she thought it was. "Don't think this is over," Victor said, jabbing a finger toward my chest and stopping just short of touching me. "I know people." "I'm sure you do." "Use the door." When it clicked shut behind them, the house felt newly swept. I leaned my forehead against the wood for a heartbeat, then locked the deadbolt out of habit. My hands were steady, my breathing wasn't small. I set a kettle on and waited for the familiar rattle. 3 days later, I opened the Riverton Daily and met a version of myself I wouldn't recognize if we passed in a mirror. Local contractor abandons elderly couple during holiday storm. A grainy photo from Cortez Buildworks' About page sat above the fold, me in an old hard hat squinting into sun. The article was neatly scrubbed of context, all edges sanded down until I fit into their chosen outline. Erratic behavior, concerning isolation, pattern of unreliability. The writer, Tara Jensen, had a toner I've learned to recognize, a polite blade. Quotes from sources close to the family describe the airport curb like a disaster zone. A storm warning that never touched our sky got sprinkled through the paragraphs like salt to cure their meat. I laid the paper flat and read it twice, then a third time slower. My coffee went cold. The urge to defend myself rose in the throat like a cough, and I made myself swallow it because nobody was in the room to hear words I couldn't get back. I set the mug on a coaster Elena used to fuss about and stared at the ceiling until the lines of the article loosened their grip. What do you do when a stranger writes you into a villain tight enough to zip? Apologize to the newspaper? Drive to their office and hold up bank statements like a student who did the extra credit? I looked out the window at the maple in the yard, bare and uncomplicated. Wind moved through its thin branches, and they didn't hiss or complain. They just moved. I sat with that for a minute and let the sting burn clean. Then I opened my laptop. I'm not a tech man, but I can navigate a website better than I pretend. The daily staff page listed Tara Jensen as lifestyle and features. Her email sat beside a smiling headshot that said approachable when it should have said thorough. I didn't write to her. Instead, I scanned the byline's history, reading 3 other stories about community generosity and a cupcake shop reopening after renovations. Nothing about labor, nothing about ethics, nothing that would harden a spine toward pushback. So why this piece, with this slant?
I moved tabs and started with Victor. Public profiles tell on you more than friends do. His career link page bragged about years at Summit First Bank and a legacy of trusted leadership. Photos from the Riverton Hills Club ribbon cutting, comments from Highland Business Alliance acquaintances about integrity and community stewardship, a throwaway post, a thank you to the Daily's managing editor for amplifying good news. There, a handhold. Sabrina had posted on Friendbook the week before. Hosting our dream Christmas in Riverbend Heights. Can't wait to use the new chef's torch. She'd tagged a dozen local friends and the Riverton Home and Garden Group. Beneath it, a string of heart emojis, clapping hands, a comment about family traditions. I clicked through photos, lace napkins, 12 name cards, the good stemware. No sign of the person I'd raised, just a curated host. Noah's career link activity showed a new connection. Tara Jensen, recent. A small note, the kind of digital dust you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for shoe prints. I sat back, pressing my fingers into the table's edge until the divot bit my skin. If I were writing a plan to humiliate a man who'd stopped being useful, I'd do it exactly like this. Pick a soft-armed section of the paper, call in a favor that sounds like a friend asking for coffee, feed in a human interest angle just sharp enough to cut, and make sure it lands in the week people are already sentimental. I wasn't furious. Fury is loud and burns fast. This was colder, something like clarity. I stood, poured the cold coffee down the sink, and watched it spiral away. Okay, I said to no one, and the kitchen took the word like a promise. I pulled a legal pad from the drawer and drew a line down the center. On the left, I wrote, "Story they told." On the right, "Record I have." Under the left, a list: abandoned, storm, pattern, elderly. Under the right, a list too: canceled transfer, weather report screenshots, 5-year ledger, age, look up articles about elderly at 58. I am 61. Victor and Diane are not fragile by any stretch. Precision would matter. I thumbed through a small box of keepsakes until I found a faded Polaroid of Noah at 6, cinnamon on his upper lip, grinning at a cookie so big it looked ridiculous. I set it by the legal pad, an anchor to a version of him who didn't speak in optics and intimate seating. I didn't want to hurt him. I wanted to stop being erased. As the sun slipped down, the house cooled the way old houses do, in honest stages. I turned on the hall light and let it spill into the room. I knew what I had to do next. Not out of vengeance, but because lies are expensive, and I was done paying for them. I would gather every receipt, every transfer notice, every screen-capped forecast. I would put it in order a stranger couldn't sneer at. I would make it impossible to pretend I was a storm when the sky had been clear. And then, on Christmas Eve, I would walk into Riverbend Heights the way a man walks into his own name.
On Christmas Eve, I turned my kitchen into a small courtroom. The evidence sat in neat piles, copies of Harbor National transfers with yellow stripes down each month, a scanned image of the down payment check, receipts for appliances and furniture I had no business knowing the names of, a printout of Sabrina's friend book posts about her dream table, a screenshot of the weather archive from the day of the supposed storm, clear sky, mild temperature, and the Riverton Daily article struck through with red pen in the margins. I made 12 packets, each stapled top left, each with a plain cover sheet that read, "For your information," not for drama, for clarity. I added one more page, a timeline. 5 years of dates in a narrow column, each line a small wound that had finally scarred over. I tucked a copy of Noah's first pay stub behind it, found in a folder Elena had labeled "Firsts," not to embarrass him, but to remind myself we had once been proud of things that didn't cost anyone else a dime. The house smelled like coffee and copy paper. I dressed like a man who meant to be taken seriously, the navy suit I'd worn to Elena's memorial, because it still fit, and because that night and this one both felt like a kind of goodbye. I polished my work boots, even though I knew no one at that table would notice. I slid the packets into a simple briefcase and stood for a long second with my hand on the handle. Was I about to blow up my own family? Or was I, for the first time in years, refusing to watch a slow collapse while smiling from the porch? The drive to Riverbend Heights took 13 minutes. Lights draped over gables and shrubs flickered in polite patterns, none of them loud enough to give the street a heartbeat. I parked a block away and walked with the briefcase bumping against my knee. Through their window I saw the choreography. Sabrina's chin lifted at just the right angle as she poured, Victor gesturing like a man who'd never had to lift a box that wasn't full of favors, Diane rounding a corner with a platter and a practiced smile. Noah was there, sleeves pushed up, trying, always trying. I rang the bell. No one answered. Holiday noise smothers sounds like that, so I opened the door and stepped inside. The scent hit first, butter and rosemary, and that clean floral vacuum smell that announces to anyone paying attention, this house is set for inspection. Sabrina looked up with her hostess face on, then went still. Victor's expression collapsed into something meaner than surprise. Diane's eyebrows climbed. Noah's shoulders dropped like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. "I'm not staying," I said, voice steady enough that I believed it. The dining room shimmered. Crystal, 12 plates, place cards Darren and Fiona and Liz calligraphied in a hand that didn't plan to tremble. I brought information. I set the briefcase on the sideboard and opened the clasps.
Paper isn't dramatic until it is. I handed a packet to the woman nearest me, a friend of Diane's from a charity board if her pearls meant what they usually mean. One to the gray-haired man studying a decanter like it was a stock option. One to a couple in matching holiday sweaters. One to Noah. Last to Sabrina. "What is this?" Diane asked, a tight note under each word. 5 years, I said, in case some of you have only heard the last 3 days. "Absolutely not," Sabrina whispered, the pitch bending toward panic. "You don't get to—" Victor stood up halfway, then remembered he wasn't at the kind of table where men shout. "Raphael, tonight is not the time." "It's the only time," I answered, and my voice surprised me with its calm. "It became public 3 days ago. It's being corrected now." Someone down the table flipped a page and stopped. Yellow highlights glowed under the chandelier. A man cleared his throat and spoke to no one in particular. "These are bank statements." "They are," I said, "transfers from my account to this address. The down payment is page 2, the renovation receipts are page 5. There's a weather archive on page 8, no storm. The article is page 9. I've marked the parts that would have mattered if accuracy had been the goal." Sabrina laughed once, a brittle sound that used to make me reach for my wallet, eager to fix whatever she'd declared broken. "He offered," she said to the table, palms up in appeal. "He's always wanted to help. We never asked him to—" "Page 4, I said. On it, a text from her number 2 winters ago that read, "Any chance you can cover this month? We had some surprise expenses." I had blacked out the numbers but kept the timestamps. "We all ask," I added. "I've asked in my life too. The difference is whether we pretend later that we didn't." The woman in pearls read the weather page, then the article, then lifted her face to Diane with a question in it that wasn't kind. "There's no storm here," she said softly. Diane's smile was the kind that holds itself together by counting to 10 in a foreign language. "It was cold. You know how it can feel." I spoke before the room decided what to believe. I'm not here to argue adjectives. I was told I wasn't welcome at Christmas. I said, okay. I canceled the transfers. 3 days later, a story called me unstable and cruel in print. If any of you value fairness at least half as much as table settings, you'll read what's in your hands.
Noah's chest rose and fell like he'd sprinted to meet a train that didn't stop. He watched me instead of the pages. I stared at the knot on the dining table, because if I looked at his face, I might forget why I came. Victor tried again. "This is deeply inappropriate," he said, looking to the right guest for reinforcement. "You're humiliating my family in our home." "Page 7, I said. There, printed from CareerLink, sat a list of mutual connections between Victor and the Daily's managing editor. A polite email header had been redacted, but the date hovered next to it like a headlight in fog. I wasn't proving a conspiracy. I was showing a pattern. "You used the paper to draw a target on me," I said, not accusing, simply drawing lines on a map. "This is me stepping out from under it." Sabrina's lips pressed white. "Everyone, please," she started, defaulting to her MC voice. "It's complicated." "It isn't," the man by the decanter said. He looked at me, then at Noah. "Are these accurate?" "They are," I said. Noah's silence was its own truth. He and I used to build birdhouses on Sundays. We both know what level looks like when the bubble stops wandering. I could feel eyes on me. The tide in a room turns quiet first. Someone near the middle whispered, "My God," not dramatically, just as an updated fact. The couple in matching sweaters shifted their chairs away from Victor, like they needed to claim an inch of Switzerland. I let the silence hold a beat longer than felt polite. "I won't be staying," I said. "I won't raise my voice. I won't take anything from this house that isn't mine. I wanted you to have the record before you decided what sort of story you were repeating at dessert." Diane found fresh footing in outrage. "You abandon us at the airport," she said, clutching at the chapter she liked best. "Who does that?" "Someone who was told he didn't belong at this table," I answered. "Someone who decided being useful isn't the same as being family.
Someone who believed 3 days of public lies deserved 1 evening of truth. Was I asking for too much, or had I spent so long asking for too little that I'd forgotten the difference? Noah finally spoke, the words small enough to tremble. "Dad, I didn't know about the article until I saw it." He looked at Sabrina, then away. "I should have called you. I didn't." That confession didn't absolve the room, but it steadied something loose in me. I closed the briefcase, left the remaining packets stacked for anyone who wanted to read truth with their dessert. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. "It'll be the last one I pay for." My hands were steady on the handle. My knees held. I felt taller, not bigger, just correctly aligned, like a door that finally catches its latch because you bothered to sand the hinge. As I turned toward the hall, voices rose, not shouting, not yet, but the brittle sound of an image cracking under weight. "Is this true? Why didn't you say? The article said—" Chairs scraped. A spoon clinked hard against porcelain and rolled. I didn't wait for its spin to slow. In the foyer, a strand of lights blinked on and off in perfect, exhausting time, as if the house itself needed reassurance that everything was running on schedule. I put my free hand against the wall and felt the hum of electricity behind paint and plaster. Homes look solid, but they're just systems kept honest by maintenance. Families too, I suppose. If no one checks the wiring, one day a switch won't do its job, and the dark will take it as an invitation. Outside, the air had a bite. I drew it in until my lungs ached a good ache. The briefcase felt lighter than when I'd carried it in. As I walked back to the truck, I caught sight of my reflection in a window. Older, yes. Alone, yes. But not bent. Not tonight. What else was there to do? Wait for the next headline to tell me my part? Pretend my silence would somehow be read as grace by people who never learned to hear it that way? I drove home through streets that had chosen white lights over multicolor, like they'd all agreed to one tasteful version of joy. At Maplecrest, the porch bulb I'd fixed burned steady. I stood under it for a full minute before going inside, letting it warm my face in that small way winter lights can. The house accepted me again, with its gentle ticks and thin warmth. I set the briefcase down, washed my hands like I'd been handling something dirty, and poured a glass of water that tasted clearer than it had yesterday. In the quiet, I imagined the sound at that table, plates cooling while reality rearranged the seating chart. I didn't savor it. I was too tired for that. I only felt the clean line of a boundary finally drawn in ink.
The fallout didn't explode. It seeped. It started with silence. For 3 days after Christmas Eve, my phone bloomed with missed calls that I let fade to gray. Sabrina left a voicemail in that slow, careful tone she uses when she's rehearsing empathy. "You made a scene, Raphael. We can fix this if you stop." Victor's message was shorter. "You don't know who you're messing with," followed by the scrape of a receiver like he'd realized the line was still recording. Diane texted a photo of their table, now empty, the caption, "Family should be private." I looked at the image, at the 12 perfect chairs, and thought, I haven't had a chair there in years. Riverton has a way of carrying news in its coat sleeves. At the Riverton Hills Club, a board member regretted that Victor's speech on philanthropic stewardship needed to be postponed. The Highland Business Alliance newsletter featured a profile on quiet generosity with a picture of a bakery owner who once replaced a young mother's cake at cost. No one printed a retraction at the Daily, but a friend of a friend told me the editor had asked for tight sourcing going forward. That's how reputations move here. A half step back, then a cough into a napkin, then a new seating chart you're not invited to see. I didn't gloat. I was busy. The porch fixture I'd coaxed back to life stayed steady, and that small insistence made me bolder. I replaced the sagging recliner with one that didn't pinch my hip. I bought the good groceries, berries and a steak, instead of bulk chicken and cans. I rehung the bathroom door that had dragged for 2 winters. I put fresh paint on the hallway in a color Elena once tagged in a magazine and wrote, "Someday" in the margin. Someday turned out to be a Thursday afternoon in January when the light was right. The house got warmer. Not from the thermostat, exactly, but from attention. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the baseboards, the radio low on old vinyl, each sound climbed out of the static. Some nights I would catch myself reaching for my phone to check a balance, then remember I wasn't subsidizing anyone's centerpiece anymore. I slept deeper. I started walking after dinner, boots crunching the thin frost along Maple Crest, breath writing brief messages to the dark that didn't need to be read. Sabrina kept calling for a while. Then, like any habit that stops being fed, the calls thinned. Noah texted twice, once a week after the dinner, "Can we talk?" And once in mid-January, a longer message I didn't open for 3 days because the preview showed my name and the word hurt, and I didn't trust myself not to go soft. When I finally tapped it, he wrote that he loved me, that things had gotten loud after I left, that he was trying to manage, that he wished I hadn't blindsided them. I wrote back one sentence. Truth told quietly is still truth. He didn't reply. We went back to silence. February held. Snow came late, thin and useless, and melted in the first clear stretch. I worked, I made stew, I threw out the dead plants on the windowsill and bought a low-maintenance fern, then read the tag twice because I did not want to kill another green thing out of distraction. I said yes to Aunt Lydia's Sunday lunches and let her grandkids show me a cardboard fort that needed, in their view, professional reinforcement. I laughed at nothing in particular. The house, noticing, laughed back, small creaks that sounded like approval. Then March delivered a white envelope with a green stripe and that bureaucratic font that makes your scalp itch. Certified mail. I signed on the porch with a pen the carrier handed me like a challenge coin. Inside, notice of default, final demand for payment. 3 months of missed mortgage payments on the Riverbend Heights address. Past due just over $8,000 with fees. 14 days to cure or begin foreclosure proceedings. Harbor National's logo sat in the corner, polite as a waiter presenting the check you'd hoped someone else would take. I carried the letter to the table and read it twice, then once upside down because my father used to do that with bad news, as if changing the angle might change the math. It didn't. I folded it along its factory crease and slid it back into the envelope. The paper felt cool, like a coin that's been passed through too many hands. I set it beside an index card that still said, "A boundary is not revenge," and realized my body believed the card more than the letter. They called that afternoon, their number, then unknown, then their number again. I let each ring finish its thought. A message from Victor arrived, careful this time, using softer words like family meeting and resolve. Diane texted, "We're all in pain." Sabrina sent a flurry of fragments. "Please just," they said, "we could lose." I put the phone on the counter and went outside to clear the drains along the side of the house where wet leaves like to cling. Kneeling there, gloved, prying a season's worth of soggy debris from a grate, I thought, this is what maintenance looks like when you do it before the flood.
Noah arrived 2 evenings later at dusk, when Maple Crest turns blue and every window throws a domestic square onto the street. He didn't text first. The knock was careful, the way a son knocks when he is both familiar and not. I opened the door and found him thinner than I remembered, tie loosened, eyes threaded red from a lack of sleep that apologies never fix. "Dad," he said, "can I?" "Yeah," I answered, stepping back. He smelled like stale coffee and whatever cologne Sabrina bought him last Father's Day. He didn't sit until I gestured. Then he perched on the edge of the couch like the cushions might collapse under the weight of what he'd brought. He looked around in a way that told me he was seeing my house for the first time in years. The fresh paint, the new recliner, the fern trying its best. "You fixed the hallway," he said, a boy for a second, noticing a thing the way boys do, in pieces. I did. I poured him water. He took it with both hands, like it might tip. The first words fought his mouth. "I'm sorry," he said finally, staring at the glass. "For Christmas, for the article, for not calling, for being a coward." His voice cracked on the last word, and that nearly did me in. I nodded. I didn't rush to soften anything. After a minute, he tried again. I didn't know, Dad, about the story. I swear, I didn't. I saw it when you did. Sabrina's parents... He stopped, chose again. I chose comfort. I let them talk about you like you were some handyman we consulted. I let them edit you out of my life because it was easier than defending you every time someone made a face about how you talk or what you do. I know, I said. The room hummed. The baseboard ticked once. The fern leaned toward the lamp like it believed the light was enough. He took a breath that rattled, then told me about the letter, the numbers, the bank's dead voice, the 14 days, the way Sabrina put her head on the counter and said, without drama, "We can't." He said the word foreclosure like it was a foreign language with too many consonants. He asked me if I could help, not in the pleading tone I remembered from his 20s when rent outran his paycheck, but in the thin voice of a man who has reached the last rung. What was I supposed to do? Step back into the harness I'd finally unclipped? Pretend the last 5 years had been a paperwork mistake and all I needed to do was sign again where it said payer? My hands wanted to reach for him. My history wanted to reach for my wallet. I let both impulses sit without moving. "I can't pay your mortgage, Noah," I said. He closed his eyes. The sentence landed between us with a dull, clean thud. "I won't," I added, because that was truer. He nodded too fast, like he'd rehearsed accepting that answer but hadn't considered how the room would feel after it arrived. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." Tears came the way men's tears often do, in a sudden overflow, not dramatic, just undeniable. He pressed his fingertips to his eyes and tried to swallow back a sound that came anyway. "I don't want you to drown, Noah," I said, voice low, "but I'm not tying the rope around my neck so you can hold on." He choked out a laugh that wasn't a joke. "That's fair." We sat. The heater ticked twice. A car passed outside, tires shushing over damp asphalt. He looked at Alana's photo on the mantel, touched the edge of the frame like it was hot. "She'd be disappointed in me," he said. "She'd be mad for a while, then she'd make soup and tell you to work." He smiled, the weary, real kind. He told me he might have to sell, that Sabrina talked about moving in with her parents for a year, like it was a season you could skip by staying inside. He said he was embarrassed. He said he was angry, at himself mostly. He asked me if there was anything I could do that would make me still his father. "You never stopped being my son," I said, "but I stopped being your bank." He flinched, then he nodded like a man agreeing to the terms of gravity. We made coffee that neither of us wanted, because you pour coffee when words run out. He stood to leave, then paused with his hand on the doorframe, like he'd learned that gesture from me and didn't know why he kept doing it. "I was proud of you that night, at Christmas. I hated it, but I was proud." "Good," I said. I meant it more than he knew. He left with his shoulders squared in a way I recognized from Little League, after a strikeout when he'd set his jaw and decide the next at-bat would be different. I watched him walk to the car, open the door, rest his forehead on the steering wheel for a beat, then start the engine. The taillight slid down the street and turned the corner. I closed the door and leaned back against it. The house held me like a good chair. I looked at the envelope on the table and at the index cards guarding my better choices. I picked up a pen and wrote a third one. "Help without erasing yourself." I stuck it beside the others, a small banner over a life that finally felt like mine.
I slept badly after Noah left, but not from doubt. It was the kind of restless night your body throws when it realizes a long habit has finally been broken and isn't sure where to put its hands. In the morning, I cleared a corner of the table and wrote a letter. Not a speech, not a threat. Terms, I titled it, because forgiveness without terms is just a reset button for the person who benefits most from your amnesia. I listed them slow, like measurements. 1. No more money. Help will look like advice, a Saturday spent lifting, a ride to a job interview, things that build a man's back instead of breaking someone else's. 2. Respect is not negotiable. If I'm excluded from any gathering for being too working class or not their kind of conversation, I won't fight to be there, I'll simply be gone. 3. No triangulation. If you have something hard to tell me, you tell me. Not through a newspaper, not through Sabrina's parents, not through the weather. 4. If a public lie is told about me, a public correction must follow. Maybe not in print, but in your circles. You don't have to defend me like a boxer, just stop the story that bleeds. 5. We start a small ritual. First Saturday breakfast, my place or a diner. Work happens in routines, so do repairs. 6. If our family ever grows, I want my name taught to small mouths without shame. I folded the paper once, slid it into an envelope with his name in block letters, and left it by the door with my gloves. Then I went outside and dug out the post hole I'd been meaning to set since October. The fence had leaned all winter, a tired line that made the yard look resigned. I mixed concrete in a wheelbarrow, the smell like wet chalk, and poured it slow. When you straighten one thing, you see the others that want a lining. That's the curse and the grace of maintenance. Noah came that afternoon, not because I asked, but because he texted, "Can I help with something?" And I replied, "Fence." He showed up in old sneakers, sleeves rolled to the elbow, that same concentration he used to bring to Lego cities and paper airplanes. We worked in a rhythm that didn't require apologies. Hold, level, tamp, check bubble, tamp again. Sweat did what shame can't. It equalized us without making either of us small. When the posts were set, we sat on the back steps with our forearms gray from dust and drank water like it was a bargain we'd kept. I slid the envelope across to him. "Read it when you're alone," I said. He nodded, thumb pressing the corner flat. He told me they had put the Riverbend Heights place on the market. Showings this week. Sabrina was angry and then quiet and then practical, in the way a person gets when numbers stop blinking. They'd seen a modest townhouse near the park. He said it like a confession and also like a strange relief. "Was I wrong to hope you'd rescue us?" he asked, not testing me, asking as if the answer might be a tool he could learn to use. What does forgiveness owe that money can't buy? "You were wrong to think rescue is love," I said. "Sometimes it's just an easy way to keep a hard thing from changing." He nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't promise. He just listened, like a man who'd finally found the stud in a wall and knew where to nail. Weeks found their pattern. He sent a screenshot of a job posting. I edited his cover letter like I used to sand edges, removing snag points, letting the grain show. He came by on Saturdays. We replaced a light switch in my bedroom. We rehung the basement door. One morning he arrived with a cardboard box I recognized the second I saw the handwriting. Ornaments. Dad's. Inside, paper snowflakes Elena had labeled with Noah's grade and the year. A wooden star I carved the winter money was so tight it ached. A string of popcorn so brittle it collapsed when we tried to move it. We stood in my living room with a small pre-lit tree I'd bought on clearance after the season, and we hung what we could. One flake broke in my hands. I almost apologized out of habit. "It's okay," Noah said, and meant it. "We can make new ones." By summer, the article in the Riverton Daily had faded the way print does when the story outlives the appetite for it. I never wrote to Tara Jensen. I didn't need a journalist to validate what a ledger already knew. But I told the truth where it counted. To the people who repeated it, to the neighbors who asked, in their indirect Riverton way, "How are you holding up?" To Aunt Lydia, who clucked and called everyone involved a fool, and then handed me a plate of food that required 2 hands. Noah and Sabrina sold the house in late September. The closing photo looked like every closing photo. 2 strained smiles holding a pen over a stack of paper. He texted it anyway, with a line. "We're relieved." I replied with a thumbs up, and then, 2 minutes later, with words.
Proud of you for doing your hard thing." He sent back a picture of the townhouse key on a ring without a charm. He wrote, "Feels lighter." In November, he came to breakfast with a bruise on his forearm where the moving truck bit him. We laughed about the way couches never turn corners, then got quiet, then ate in the kind of ease that didn't need forgiving because it was built without debt. He set his coffee down and said, "I told Victor and Diane that if you're not welcome, I'm not coming." He said it simply, like an address. Can love survive without respect? Maybe. But it will limp, and it will look for someone to carry it. I was tired of being a crutch. December arrived. I bought cranberries because the color cheered the kitchen, and because Elena's recipe card, zested orange, pinch of salt, let it thicken, still smelled faintly of vanilla ink. I roasted a small turkey with her rub, the citrus waking the house. I left Elena's chair where it always sits, not because of sadness, but because some absences deserve a place setting so they don't haunt the doorway. I invited Aunt Lydia and her grandkids, and my neighbor who hates cooking but loves company. We ate until the house hummed, until the kids started inventing a game with the chairbacks and a scarf, until the living room looked like a catalog photo got into a fight with a toy aisle.
Noah texted late. "Can I stop by?" He arrived with 2 grocery store pies and a nervousness he wore like a jacket. Sabrina wasn't with him. He didn't explain, and I didn't ask. Some truths are ready when they're ready. We made plates for him, and he ate standing in the kitchen, fork against paper, like a teenager in a hurry. He asked if he could hang one of the paper snowflakes. He chose 3rd grade. He reached up and took his time with the hook so it wouldn't tear. After the guests left, he lingered. He ran a finger along the edge of Elena's chair. "I don't know what next Christmas looks like," he said, "but I know I want you in it." He paused, on purpose. "I want that too," I said. He hugged me at the door like he meant it. I watched him walk down the steps, shoulders no longer folded forward to make himself smaller. The porch light I'd fixed in January burned steady over his head, throwing a small circle on the snowless stoop. It seemed enough. I cleaned the kitchen in quiet loops. Plate, water, towel, repeat. I took the envelope with the terms from the dish on the entry table and slid it into a folder labeled "Kept." Not because the conditions vanished, but because they'd been spoken out loud and lived, and that's how rules become bones. I stood under the hall light and looked at the tree. Paper, wood, light. Nothing expensive, everything earned. Maybe that was the point all along. A different kind of Christmas, built not on ransom, but on chairs pulled up for the people who show up with their hands, not just their appetites. When I finally sat down, the house felt like it had exhaled. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It had shape. The scrape of a chair leg, the tick of a cooling pan, the soft complaint of the floor where Elena always stood to peel oranges. I realized forgiveness had arrived the way snow sometimes does in Riverton, without ceremony, just a different kind of light on the street, a hush that makes the familiar look possible again. I didn't win anything. There were no trophies for boundaries, no applause for refusing to live as a wallet with a pulse. What I have instead is smaller and steadier, a calendar with breakfasts on it, a fence that stands straight, a son who has learned the grammar of respect and is trying to speak it without an accent. Those are not plot twists. They are the work, and work has always been my language. Do I still feel the sting when I think about that 12-foot tree in Riverbend Heights and the way my name slid off their guest list? Yes. Some bruises don't fade. They turn into landmarks you steer by. But I also feel the warmth of a table that didn't check resumes at the door, where a paper snowflake mattered more than symmetry, and where a man my age finally learned that no can be an act of care, first for yourself and then, strangely, for everyone else.
If you're listening because someone told you that love equals sacrifice without end, I hope my voice sits with you the way a steady hand sits on a shoulder. You're allowed to straighten your fence. You're allowed to stop a payment that costs you your self-respect. You're allowed to ask for terms and to mean them. Tonight, the porch light is steady. The tree glows in the window, and I am at last inside my own life.